We'll call to order the House Armed Services Subcommittee on Sea Power and Projection Forces, and today the subcommittee convenes to receive testimony on contributing factors to C-130 mishaps and other intra-theater airlift challenges. The distinguished panel of Air Force and Navy leaders testifying before us today are Lieutenant General Jerry D. Harris, Deputy Chief of Staff for Strategic Plans and Programs, Department of the Air Force, and Lieutenant General Donald Kirkland, Commander, Air Force Sustainment Center, Department of Air Force, and Rear Admiral Scott D. Kahn, Director, Air Warfare, Office of Chief of Naval Operations, Department of the Navy. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being here with us today. We deeply appreciate your time and your viewpoints. Recently, there have been an alarming rise in non-combat aviation accidents. From fiscal years 2013 to 2017, manned fighter, bomber, helicopter, and cargo warplane accidents rose nearly 40%, resulting in the loss of life of over 130 service members in aviation mishaps. Of these incidents, over 20% of fatalities occurred in 3 accidents involving legacy intra-theater aircraft, C-130H Hercules, KC-130T, and C-2A Greyhound aircraft operated by the Puerto Rican Air National Guard, U.S. Marine Corps Reserve, and Navy Active Duty, respectively. Considering these 3 mishaps involve legacy intra-theater aircraft, it is my fervent belief that the services must do everything possible to ensure the safety of flight. To this end, among the things this committee must consider is the recapitalization and modernization of the oldest and most vulnerable legacy aircraft. A review of the Air Force's intra-theater airlift portfolio shows that the service is on track to recapitalize its regular component units with C-130J aircraft. Air Force is now recommending that the Reserve and Air National Guard retain significant capacity in the legacy C-130H aircraft. To extend the life and relevance of the legacy Guard and Reserve fleet, the Air Force is recommending funding for major modernization programs, such as center wing box replacement to lengthen service life, in addition to pursuing aviation modernization program upgrades to keep these aging aircraft relevant. This committee has been active in supporting propulsion system upgrades for legacy C-130 aircraft and the reserve component by authorizing additional funds for this important effort. To date, the Air Force has not requested this funding in its base budget. A review of Marine intra-theater aircraft shows that the service is also on track to fully recapitalize its aging KC-130T fleet with 79 new KC-130J aircraft to include its reserve squadrons to be completed by 2023. And finally, the Navy begins to recapitalize its legacy K-130T fleet of 25 aircraft by procuring its first 3 new aircraft in 2023. With that said, questions remain as to the level of effort being placed in the pursuit of this program by the Navy and Air Force Reserve sponsors as they seek to balance the needs of competing service priorities. Additionally, there is concern over how the services responded to the crash of the KC-130T and prang C-130H, with Navy and Marines grounding their fleets and Air Force choosing to continue to fly those aircraft. And more specifically, this committee is interested in learning how and why the legacy C-130 propeller systems are serviced differently between the Marine Corps and Air National Guard aircraft at the depots. George Patton once said, "The more you sweat in peace, the less you bleed in war." Our most urgent responsibility is to ensure enough sweat is being shed to reduce this bleeding. With that, I will go to our ranking member, Mr. Courtney, for his opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses for their testimony here today. The Sea Power and Projection Forces Subcommittee today meets once again to consider a rash of tragic mishaps that have cost the lives of many service members. In 2017, we held a series of hearings and briefings to consider the causes, consequences, and path forward following 4 ship collisions and groundings. Alongside our partners on the Readiness Subcommittee, we conducted frequent oversight of this issue and also guided through a number of reforms in the NDAA on surface ship procedure, which, again, we believe will reduce the amount of risk for these kinds of events happening in the future. As the chairman said, in the last year and a half, unfortunately, we've also seen 3 fatal mishaps across our Air National Guard, Marine Corps Reserve, and Navy Air Fleet. Tragically, these incidents have taken the lives of 28 service members. Once again, Congress and the military services must come together to assess the causes of these mishaps and to ensure that the right focus is being applied in order to prevent similar mishaps in the future. As we've learned through the process of reviewing ship collisions and groundings, a single mishap has immediate causes, but a rash of mishaps derives from systemic issues within the force. Fewer flying hours leads to less experienced pilots who are more likely to make mistakes during stressful situations. Decreased material readiness of our fleet makes mechanical failure, sometimes catastrophic, more likely. As we review each individual tragedy, we must be focused not only on what a mishap says about the individual case, but what each mishap can tell us about the state of military aviation overall. While we were focused here today on the Intra-Theater Airlift fleet, I was glad to see that the full House and Senate, under the leadership of Mr. Thornberry and Ranking Member Smith, included a provision in the fiscal year 19 National Defense Authorization Act, which establishes a National Commission on Military Aviation Safety. This commission will review the rates of military aviation mishaps across the services and across aviation missions, assess the underlying causes of these mishaps, and make recommendations to improve safety, training, and maintenance and personnel policies. I hope the testimony here today will help inform and guide the work of this commission as it gets started on this important mission. I look forward to hearing the witnesses' views on these issues today and yield back my time.
Thank you, Mr. Courtney. I'll now turn to our witnesses for their opening statements.
Thank you, Chairman Whitman, Ranking Member Courtney, for the opportunity to appear before the HASC Subcommittee on Sea Power and Projection Forces. On behalf of Secretary Wilson and Chief of Staff of the Air Force, General Goldfein, I'd like to also commend you for the FY19 NDA efforts. If the Congress and the Executive Branch are able to continue on your current pace, we expect to have an FY19 budget on time, first time in decades. That's not starting a year with a continuing resolution or worse, a sequestered budget, and that's a favorable start for FY19. Well done, and thank you. As we review your draft legislation for the FY19 NDAA, we all recognize the sacrifices that the American families make to live and enjoy the freedoms in a safe and secure democracy. With committees like yours as our best supporters and guarantors of that freedom, we recognize the importance of hearings like today on C-130 modernization and safety. Let me be the first to say that we would like to do more and go faster when it comes to modernization of our C-130 fleet. We have reduced most of our fleets over the last decade, and the C-130 fleet has been no exception, falling from more than 400 aircraft to about 300 in the Air Force inventory. The C-130 continues to be a workhorse that accomplishes tactical airlift, Antarctic resupply, aeromedical evacuation, natural disaster relief missions, search and rescue, firefighting duties, and support to special operations. But we have had to make hard choices because of the declining budgets, late budgets of the past, sequestration, and new strategies for changing threats. During this period, we prioritized safety and then compliance when it comes to operating, maintaining, and sustaining all of our capabilities. We just haven't been able to get to it all. Readiness, lethality, and cost-effective modernization efforts have guided our plans as we continue to deliver the world's greatest air and space force. I request our written statements be entered into the record, and I look forward to your questions and our ensuing discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, Lieutenant General Davis. Lieutenant General Kirkland.
Chairman Whitman, Ranking Member Courtney, distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to update you on legacy C-130 sustainment and readiness. On behalf of our Secretary, the Honorable Heather Wilson, and our Chief of Staff, General David Goldfein, I appreciate your continued support and demonstrated commitment to our airmen, Air Force civilians, our families, and veterans. As I attest to my written statement for the record, the C-130s are a safe, effective aircraft for its missions, and we have programs in place to ensure these conditions going forward. We take our responsibilities for our people and our mission very seriously. Earlier this spring, General Goldfein directed all wing commanders and operational maintenance leaders to conduct a one-day operations safety review. Commanders focused on assessing processes and looking for areas of improvement to prevent future mishaps. Our service members and citizen airmen are our greatest asset, and we are absolutely committed to their safety as we continue to deliver combat power to our combatant commanders. On the sustainment front, this year we began a consolidation of all C-130 program depot maintenance workload currently at the Ogden Air Logistics Complex in Utah to the Warner Robins Air Logistics Complex at Robins Air Force Base, Georgia. This transition will be completed by fiscal year '22. Because all three of our complexes operate as an enterprise, our Air Force will be able to achieve efficiencies and greater economies of scale. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Lieutenant General Kirkland. Now we'll go to Rear Admiral Khan.
Chairman Whitman, Ranking Member Courtney, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today and discuss the Navy's Intra-Theater Airlift Plan. The Navy provides continuous forward-deployed maritime strike and expeditionary power projection force. Supporting that force requires a unique logistics infrastructure. Due to the distributed nature of naval operations, logistics support includes inter-theater lift that bridges the gap between the joint force provider at aerial ports of debarkation to those fleet logistics sites around the globe. We call this capability the Navy Unique Fleet Essential Airlift, or NUFIA. Operated entirely by the Navy Reserves, the NUFIA consists of 24 C-140Ts, 15 C-40 aircraft, and provide the responsive, flexible, and rapidly deployable air logistics to support necessary combat operations from the sea. The C-40A leads the NUFIA fleet in range and capacity, able to carry in excess of 36,000 pounds, 121 personnel, or a combination of both, and it's the only medium-lift aircraft that's able to transport hazardous cargo and personnel at the same time. Thanks to congressional support, the Navy will now field its last 2 program aircraft in FY19 to complete a program record of 17 aircraft. The C-130T fills the NUFIA requirements for medium lift and outsized cargo. It is the only Navy aircraft capable of moving all modules of the F-35 engine. Additionally, the C-130T provides unique capability of delivering passengers and cargo to austere locations, including unprepared fields and runways less than 3,000 feet. And in light of the landscape that we're in right now strategically, that's probably an important capability that we need. The Navy completed the procurement of the C-130Ts in 1996. We are now looking to recapitalize our effort, beginning with advanced procurement in 19 and buying 3 aircraft, as you said, sir, in FY23. But it's not just recapitalizing, it's the modernization of the aircraft we have to keep them relevant. In PB19, there's $28.5 million for avionics, communications, and obsolescence upgrades to keep the aircraft compliant with FAA and ICAO standards to be able to, in the air traffic control management systems across the world. Additionally, the $121 million that Congress adds for the MP2000 props to be able to get us out of this red stripe, as well as getting the new legacy blades that we're getting from Warner Roberts in concert. We'll have all the aircraft up by FY19 and all the aircraft converted to the MP2000 by FY20. And there was also $8.9 million to update the carbon brakes that Congress gave us through an degree of funds for our reserves to improve the reliability and maintainability of those aircraft. These modernization efforts are critical to maintain the Navy logistics support to our deployed forces. As I said, we began advanced procurement in FY19 to recapitalize our KC-130Js with 3 aircraft being bought in 23. If the budget changes, budget profiles changes, and subsequent budget cycles, we may have to revisit whether we continue to recapitalize or modernize. And based on those budget levels, that decision will be made for in a different time. As people and parts arrive to our fleet logistics sites via the NUFIA aircraft, they're transferred to one of our Navy's 34 C-2 aircraft that completes that last tactical mile to get those parts and people out to our carrier strike groups. C-2A is over 30 years old. We have our maintenance material condition challenges associated with that. We are addressing those. But we're also looking to recapitalize that aircraft for a CMV-22. Initial plan was to sundown the C-2 in 2027. With the help of Congress with additional adds, we've been able to push that left to FY24. CMV-22 will ILC in the Navy in 2021, and that is mapped to our first F-35 deployment for those engine considerations. And we will continue to transition and be transition complete by the end of FY24. Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Courtney, distinguished members, thank you for your leadership and the support of the subcommittee to provide the resources that enable our sailors to do their job. On behalf of the men and women working tirelessly to protect American interests at home and abroad, I thank you for the opportunity to discuss Navy inter-theater lift plans, and I look forward to your questions.
Rear Admiral Khan, thank you. Thanks so much for your on the Navy's efforts there with KC-130T. Lieutenant General Kirkland, I want to start with you. It's my understanding that the KC-130T, the Navy version, and the C-130H, Air Force, both have their propulsion system as well as other depot-level maintenance done at Warner Robins Air Logistics Center. I do understand that both the Navy and the Air Force have taken a different approach to propeller assemblies. So I wanted to dig down a little bit into that. And could you explain to me what steps have been taken to consolidate those efforts on what we're doing to upgrade propeller assemblies? And has the Air Force and Navy response or their efforts in addressing propeller assemblies, has that led to a difference in how they responded to these recent accidents? And what do you think is the outcome of where we are now with the safety of those aircraft based on this depot-level maintenance?
Chairman Whitman, thank you for that question. I'll address both those in turn. Sir, you're aware that at Warner Robins Air Logistics Complex is a single complete overhaul facility for all 54 H-60 four-bladed propellers. That's the one used on the Air Force C-130H and its variants, Navy Marine Corps C-130T and KC-130T aircraft, and a slightly different version of the propeller is used on the Navy's P-3. Differences in the manuals evolved due to incorporation of changes. These updates to technical manuals occur frequently. Their purpose is to correct errors or include process improvements that we've learned or identified during maintenance. And although the Warner Robins technicians were trained on all manuals, and although there was collaboration and coordination between Navy and Air Force C-130 program offices, there was no formal effort to ensure respective changes were synchronized between the two services in their manuals. Last fall, our Air Force Program Executive Officer responsible for the C-130 formed an independent review team. The IRT was formed to guide development of updated propeller overhaul requirements. The IRT consisted of members from the Air Force, the Navy Marine Corps, and members of the aerospace industry. Additionally, the U.S. Navy Propeller Program embedded an engineer within the Air Force C-130 Program Office. Based on IRT recommendations, both services program offices are updating propeller overhaul processes to create a common set of procedures. Overhaul processes updates are complete for all components except for the propeller blade. Using these updated procedures, Warner Robins began buildup and delivery of the 54 H-60 propellers in March 2018 in support of naval aircraft. These propellers are assembled using new production blades procured from the original equipment manufacturer, who is currently increasing delivery from 30 a month to 48 a month, we believe by October. Procedures for propeller blade overhaul continue to be updated and refined. Initial validation efforts, which started last April, should conclude this fall, and we expect the Warner Robins depot will reach full production capacity in early 2019. I would add the Coast Guard is participating in these same efforts and will incorporate those changes in their manuals, and we will also distribute this to partner nations through country-specific technical orders. With respect to the response, Chairman Whitman, I would focus, it is my understanding that the focus was more on the operational impacts, the differences. The fleet sizes had something to do with that, but our program office, it is my understanding that our program office made a value determination based upon the severity of the risk against the probability of occurring, and arrived at a serious risk and accepted that risk so that the U.S. Air Force may continue to provide the tactical lift that the C-130 provides.
Thank you, Lieutenant General Kirkland. Lieutenant General Harris, I wanted to ask and dig down a little bit deeper on what's happening with some of the upgrades. You know, since 2014, Congress has put additional dollars in over and above the base budget for C-130H propulsion system upgrades, and that includes the T-56 3.5 engine upgrade program, the NP-2000 8-blade propellers. Looking at that, if you look at where it's been applied, the Wyoming Air National Guard has put those upgrades in place, and they've seen a 14% increase in fuel efficiency and performance increases. And I know currently the Air National Guard is testing this engine enhancement and propeller upgrade package to see if they can bring additional operational sustainment benefits. Give me your perspective. Does the Air Force support these engine and propeller upgrades? And if so, why hasn't the Air Force requested these funds for upgrade kits for the Air National Guard and in the Air Force Reserve C-130H fleets? And is there a possibility for the Air Force to prioritize modernization efforts for the C-130H fleet, given its current age and material condition state?
Chairman, sir, thank you for those questions. Yes, the Air Force is prioritizing the upgrade of this fleet, but the average C-130 age is 26 years old. And when we look across our fleets, we've got tankers that are pushing 50. We have bombers that are over that age. So as we do a priority across our budget, we have to look at all of the fleets that we operate and the capabilities associated with that. For the congressional ads, we thank you for that. It's giving us an opportunity to study and look at efficiencies and improvements that we can bring into the legacy fleet. We have an ongoing operational utility evaluation that should report out in March of this year to give us the information we need to make those decisions. When it comes to submitting it in a budget as a budget request, our process working through OSD and then through the OMB effort, we're limited on top-line TOA, and I can't ask for everything. So we prioritize across there. We do start with safety first, and then we move through compliance and our efforts across all of those fleets. And once we have our the operational utility evaluation out in March, we'll have better understanding of how this plays. We are seeing improvements, as you said, sir. The Wyoming Guard unit is seeing an ability to get better efficiencies out of the aircraft, which is certainly something that we're interested in across our fleet.
Very good. Thanks, Lieutenant General Harris. We'll now go to our ranking member, Mr. Courtney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just really one quick question, Admiral Khan. Again, you described the replacement program for the C-2 planes, and again, just for the benefit of people who may be watching this and don't know maybe some of the acronyms, again, those are the prop planes that, again, deliver people and cargo to aircraft carriers and land with a tail hook, and then they're going to be replaced by the MVCB-22 Ospreys, which again will land vertically. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, it is.
Okay. Thank you. So again, the plan that you described, clearly the Navy's trying to accelerate that replacement process. These are still extremely old planes, as you and I discussed the other day, the C-2s. I mean, what I heard from your description is it's still about a 5-year window, right, for total replacement by 2024. Is that
That is correct, sir.
right now? I mean, do you still feel like that's the right plan given the age of those planes? And obviously, you can't spin straw into gold, but I mean, really, this is your opportunity. If you feel that that should be something we should be looking at in terms of trying to accelerate it further, I just sort of yield the floor to you to talk about that.
Yes, sir. First of all, the C-2 is a cargo aircraft propeller with an arresting gear that catapults and arrests for landing off the carrier. It is the primary means by which we get cargo airborne via airlift out to the carrier or people or U.S. mail to keep our sailors, although there's the internet now, but it is a 30-year-old airplane. We have gone from 32% mission capable rate in 17 to 40% in 18, so the trajectory is in the right directions, but it's nowhere near where we want it to be. And we're going to continue to make those investments to make sure those aircraft are safe to get airborne until the end of its service life. I have to fully fund that aircraft until I'm completely done with it. The transition plan is the CMV-22, which is just a modified version of what the Marine Corps flies, but with more fuel and a different comm architecture for beyond line of sight communications. The range, endurance of the CMV-22 exceeds that of the COD when you consider a hot tropical day, fully loaded with 10,000 pounds of cargo, being able to fly in excess of 1,100 miles, which meets our requirements for combat operations. We have accelerated the sundown of the C-2 from 2027 to 2024. We have our first aircraft being built in Philadelphia today, rolling down the line. That aircraft will deliver in FY20. We then have to do a modified OT and DT, and the operational test, the only thing that we're testing are the things different on the CMV-22 as compared to the MV-22. So that's going to be a very compressed test. We then IOC and get our first E-3 aircraft to deploy in 2021. There is no means by which I can accelerate that any further. When you look at the MILCON, the training that's required for our sailors to operate, maintain, and the aircrew that have to fly and get the hours they need, we're going as fast as we can go. Any additional aircraft at this point would relieve or provide a shock absorber during the transition as we go from transition to deployment and follow-on detachments until we're completely divested of our C2.
Great. Well, thank you. I mean, that's a very helpful picture you painted in terms of the program. And again, I just encourage you guys to just keep us abreast. One question is obviously there was an accident and there was a loss of life, and I realize this hearing is not about individual because maybe just talk about the status of the case investigation.
Yes, sir. Well, the investigation is still ongoing. Our recovery and salvage efforts, we have the 22,000 feet of Kevlar cable to recover the aircraft that is at 18,000 feet of water in the Philippine Sea. We have to do some follow-on testing with the winch on the salvage vessel to be able to reel up this aircraft. And then now that we're in typhoon season in that part of the world, we're going to have to wait for the seas to abate. Our best estimate right now is when we look at the conditions that the ocean will provide, we're looking late spring, early summer of next year.
Great. Well, thank you for your testimony and your great efforts, and also to the other witnesses for being here. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Courtney. We'll now go to Mr. Gallagher.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To follow up on the line of questioning that the ranking member was pursuing, you talk about the differences between the C2 and the CMV-22, which you're testing right now. My understanding is that one of the biggest differences is the lack of a pressurized cabin on the CMV-22. Can you talk to me about what impact that might have physiologically on passengers and aircraft, and what we should know about those implications?
Yes, sir. The V-22 program has in excess of 425,000 hours in all unpressurized cockpits, and we haven't seen any concern at all about having people inside that unpressurized cockpit. For the CMV-22, it will fly 10,000 feet and below. And that was part of the requirements, that it has to be 10,000 feet and below with a full load of equipment and meet the range specifications to that. And the aircraft will be able to do that. Additionally, for the, it also has some opportunity because it's tilt rotor, not only to go on carriers, but when any deck is certified for that aircraft, a float forward staging base, or whatnot in the future, that gives us flexibility to distribute parts in a distributed maritime operations environment. Did I answer your question, sir?
Yes, sir. General Kirkland, we've heard a lot, when we travel around to various shipyards, bases, whatnot, anyone that involves hiring of federal civilian employees, just how difficult that process can be. And even with aggressive energy and management, it can take as long as 140 days to hire a new worker. So as you look at sort of additional C-130 workload, talk to me a little bit about whether you feel like you have the skilled labor on hand and the challenges contained in the federal civilian hiring process.
Congressman Gallagher, thank you for that question. I'd first like to thank the committee and the larger Committee on Armed Services for the direct hiring authority which we've been provided, which was approved in 2016, and we've used through the NDAA temporary authority, which I believe is through 2025. Thank you for that. It has allowed us to hire over 1,500 employees, averaging at 78 days. And that is a combination of the direct hiring authority, but also process improvements with our personnel center to skinny down that process. Using direct hiring authority, we've accounted for that 75% of our external hires at the Air Logistics Complex are depots. We are working to expand the direct hiring authority to those organizations which directly support our depots. And specific to the C-130 workload, through the combination of those efforts, we are 100% manned for all of our fiscal year 19 C-130 work at Warner Robins. Now, the challenge remains because as we grow our workload there, particularly as we transition the naval aircraft currently going to Utah down to Georgia, we will continue to hire year after year. But the DHA, the Direct Hiring Authority, is a key element of the 1212 initiative going on at Warner Robins right now, which began this past summer. I would add to that one other thing, that while we work closely with vocational and technical schools around the locations where our depots are, the Air Force Sustainment Center would also benefit from creating an on-ramp for our recently retired military personnel. These skilled journeymen bring years of experience and a vital buffer as we experience other people in the workforce. And we're asking through our service to make an exception to the 180-day waiting period in support of federal wage system and some of the lower-level general schedule employees, particularly with the logistics and supply chain management. We need to retain this experience for our service members as they walk out the door.
I appreciate that. I mean, I tend to think that the health of the civilian industrial base is one of the most important issues that we face. It could be a limiting factor if, God forbid, we had to scale up in response to a great power conflict, and it's something that's easy to overlook. It's certainly something I hear, too, beyond military industrial base from every company in Northeast Wisconsin. It's just the challenge of finding people, keeping people, retaining talent, and so I think it's something we're going to need to continue to think about here on the committee. And with that, I yield the remainder of my time, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Gallagher. We will now go to Ms. Bordallo. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member, and thank you to our witnesses, General Harris, General Kirkland, and Admiral Khan. Well, I certainly have traveled on C-130s multiple times. I consider them to be the military horses of their aircraft. But gentlemen, the FY19 NDAA outlined a framework proposed by Ranking Member Smith for a National Commission on Military Aviation Safety. So I'm going to ask you, General Harris or Admiral Khan, can you please offer your thoughts on how this commission will benefit mobility, mishaps, and impact intra-theater airlift challenges?
Yes, ma'am. If you don't mind, I'll start.
Oh, surely.
Our approach to any option to look at safety, that's our number one guidance for the business that we do in the defense of our nation. So an opportunity to look into that and have those discussions are certainly something that we look forward to and are working with. That element will be part of a larger study that's being released by Transportation Command on the study of our overall airlift, so not just TAC lift, but also our strategic lift. We'll continue to work with that and make sure that we get the information that we need, and as safety is our number one issue, that's where we will focus resources if we determine that that's where we have to go.
Very good. You consider it then a benefit?
Yes, ma'am.
Admiral Khan?
Anything that addresses or looks into the safety of our people, our equipment, or civilians that fly in them, I think it's definitely value added.
Very good. My second question is, Lieutenant General Harris, Secretary Wilson outlined her plan for a 386 Squadron Air Force to us on Wednesday morning, just this last Wednesday. The Air Force leadership calls for reducing the number of tactical airlift squadrons by 2, but increasing special ops, fixed-wing electronic warfare, and fixed-wing rescue units by 17. Now, if the pilot crisis is depleting our experienced aviators, how does the Air Force intend to man these new units with senior aviators and mitigate risk across the C-130 force?
So, ma'am, you bring up a great question. The first thing we want to do is retain the fantastic airmen that we have now. If we have an air crew with 10 or 15 years experience, training more will take us 10 to 15 years to get that experience back. So we recognize the most important feature that you're asking about is how do we take care of the fantastic airmen and the aviators that we have across all the services. So that's our start that we're working with. But we also have to get after the foundation. So we are improving our capacity to generate new pilots and new aircrew members, and then our ability to absorb those. So with our requirement to grow based on the National Defense Strategy, which is where Secretary Wilson is pulling her information from, we have to be able to be sized to fit the Air Force that we need to win our nation's wars. So we are starting at the beginning to retain those that we already have and then growing our capacity to build new ones and bring them on.
Very good. My third question, the Air Force, we need outlined by the Secretary, and the Chief also ties the service's way forward to the national defense strategy and long-term strategic competition with China and Russia. General Harris and Admiral Khan, can you speak to how intra-theater airlift requirements will change in this environment in regards to tactical and strategic airlift?
Yes, ma'am. Intra-theater airlift will continue to be a workhorse, as you described, and the C-130 will provide that for the long term. And the focus of that Air Force We Need study recognizes that we actually have more risk in our strategic lift. So you see some growth in our ability to get after what we're required to do to meet, as the NDS says, our bigger threats of China than Russia. And that's a different focus than we've had in the last several years. So you're going to see a requirement to grow across many of our capabilities in the Air Force.
Well, that's good news. Admiral Khan?
I think if you look at the size of the Pacific and you think of sustained combat operations, the importance of logistics cannot be overstated. Whether it be our MSC fleet that provides surface lift, or our new FIA aircraft, or C-40 Alphas, and our C-130Ts right now. They're going to play an integral part of making sure the warfighters have what they need to wage combat operations in that environment.
Well, that's good news. And, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Bordallo. Before we go to Ms. Hartzler, I want to take this opportunity, since this is the last of our subcommittee hearings for this subcommittee, is to thank Ms. Bordallo for her service and the tremendous efforts that she's put forward on behalf of all of our men and women in uniform. She has been, I think, the leading proponent anywhere she goes. If anybody comes across her and doesn't know where Guam is or what goes on Guam, then you're not listening, because she is absolutely the number one fan of the people of Guam, and I know that they appreciate your service to the nation. You've done a spectacular job. We've had the opportunity to travel around the world together on Codels, and you've just been spectacular. So thank you so much. What a real testament to public service, and our nation is better because of your service. So
Thank you very much, Mr. Whitman, and I've enjoyed working with you.
Yeah, it's been an honor and a pleasure. So with that, we'll go to Ms. Hartzler.
Mr. Chairman, I would concur on those remarks, and we're gonna miss you. So, gentlemen, thank you for being here on this very important topic. According to the DoD National Guard and Reserve Equipment Report for fiscal year 2018, the average age of the C-130H fleet is 27 years old. The aircraft assigned to the Puerto Rico Air National Guard were among some of the oldest in the fleet. The Mishaps aircraft was delivered in 1965. So can you explain how the decision is made to assign aircraft to Air National Guard units?
Yes, ma'am, I'll take that. We actually have a strategic basing process that works through where and how we assign the aircraft that are changing. Based on the guidance that we've been given, we have put new J model C-130s into both the active guard and reserve. So we have elements that are in each one of those fleets. And once we had that, then we looked at replacing the oldest aircraft first, and many of those were in the active duty. So that's why most of the E models have been retired. Actually, all the E models have been retired at this point, and we're getting after the last aging ones. So Puerto Rico is some of the oldest aircraft that are still flying. They're down to just a few airplanes. We are continuing to work through the strategic basing process to determine what's the best mission suitable for the fantastic airmen that we have there.
What is the age of the oldest aircraft? So are there still other ones in Puerto Rico that are 65 models?
There are some 65, ma'am, spread across the fleet. Most of those are simple H's, because we have an H, an H1, 2, 3, the different variants of those. We show that C-130H's are resident both in Puerto Rico, and we also have some in Great Falls and a couple other locations.
Mm-hmm. So there is a plan then to recapitalize the legacy C-130 aircraft?
To recapitalize, no, ma'am. We are doing our best to modernize, and at this time, we are not asking for additional recapitalization efforts. We do see support each year from Congress for more, and as we get new C-130Js, we do put those into the oldest fleet, and that's how we'll work the strategic basing process.
Okay, very good. After the mishap, there was a strategic review that was done that came out with some a list of risks and recommended mitigations, corrective actions to be completed not later than June 15th of this year. And I apologize, I was a little late. Maybe you've already covered that, but can you give me an update on kind of that report? I haven't had a chance to read it. What were some of the recommendations that were part of that, and where are you at in implementing those that were supposed to be done by June?
With regard to a specific accident, ma'am, the investigation's still ongoing, and we have not implemented the anything that would have come from there yet. For the strategic report that you're speaking of, if it was a June implementation, I'll have to get back with you for that.
Okay. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Hartzler. We'll now go to Mrs. Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I, of course, acknowledge my colleague and all the teachable moments that you that you created for us. I think we learned a great deal from you, and I appreciate it. I wanted to just go back to sort of a basic question, because I know that Admiral Khan, you raised in your statement the fact that Congress, you'd like to see Congress prioritizing preparedness, and also you were concerned about the resilience, I think, as well, of our force posture, and certainly accelerating technological advancements. What could you be somewhat specific about it, and to others as well? What would you really like to see in Congress's desire, of course, and our opportunity to really help in this situation?
Well, certainly Congress help. We have guidance from the National Defense Strategy that gives us priorities. We have guidance from the CNO in terms of the things we need to prioritize. He calls it the Navy the Nation needs, which is the maritime expression of that single strategy in the National Defense Strategy. Readiness recovery across all our aircraft is a priority. At the mission capable rates that we have right now, it affects retention, it affects combat capability, it affects our ability to lethality of what we need to do. For the NFIA aircraft, it affects our ability to do the things we need to do based on the various priority missions. And if our aircraft aren't up, we aren't able to execute those missions or train the people to execute those missions. So from a PB-19 level and what's in that budget, we're doing a lot. We will always have more requirements than resources. It would always come down to prioritization. I just don't want to go back to where we have to make false choices of readiness or modernization or recapitalization. We've been there before, and we shouldn't go back.
Mm-hmm. General Kirkland, did you want to respond as well?
Ma'am, actually, in that topic, I'll defer to General Harris on the Program X.
Ma'am, very similar to the Navy response. Resiliency is extremely important, and as long as we pay our airmen a fair wage and then give them a value-added mission where they feel like they are working and attaining the freedom that this country fights for, we find that the airmen are empowered and want to do what it is that they do so well. Our job to take care of those airmen is to make sure they have the resources they need to get that job done in the most efficient, effective, and safe manner, and we do start with safety, then compliance. So much like our Navy colleagues, we do have to make some tough choices. We do our best to prioritize those, and it's an older fleet for the C-130s, but our KC-135s and our B-52 fleets are even older. So we're doing what we can to modernize and make those airplanes sustain and get the mission done that we need based on the priorities that we have.
Mm-hmm. So I think I'm hearing you also say not to ignore the personnel issues in making sure that we're attracting and bringing into the force as well as maintaining the force that we have. And sometimes I think that we have a tendency to think that, well, that's where we can save money. And it sounds like that's not been your experience. Thank you. I appreciate that. I know my colleague brought up the need for, and you responded about the skilled journeyman that we need. I'm also wondering about STEM fields as well. I mean, there's been a tremendous amount of focus on this, and yet when it comes to the number of individuals that are needed in just a host of different areas, you know, we graduated about 500,000 STEM students. China produced about 1.3 million. How is your job really made harder by the fact that we have not invested actually in human capital as well as we could?
Well, to this point, the service has been able to hire the talent that we've needed, which is very helpful for us. We see that coming out of the American public. We do what we can to invest in STEM, and our Secretary Wilson has been very good about that, coming from her background. So she has been most helpful in encouraging us to work with the universities and academia to make sure that we have people understanding that it's a great career field to come into any of our services and defend our country.
If I might add, from the sustainment perspective on the Air Logistics Complex Air Force side, engineers in that technical workforce are absolutely part of that we have to have. It's a national defense issue. Our growth industry is in software, both in development and the sustainment of the software, sometime for 50, 60 years of a weapon system. We need to recruit and retain electrical engineers, other engineers to keep that business going and provide a cost-effective solution for our readiness.
Do you see us doing doing that across the board as well as we could? I mean, making sure that what role should we all be playing, really, I think, in terms of reaching out to students, whether it's in middle school, high school, to really help them to see. You know, we always say you can't be what you can't see. We have, in some communities, we have the opportunity for young people to know something about what's going on with the military and certainly with the Air Force, Navy, et cetera. But there are many communities in which that's not true. How do we make sure that we're reaching them as well?
I think all the services are in a competition for talent with industry, with academia, and within the services itself. I think we have to look at how we train differently to our people. How do we set them up for success? That's part of the ready, relevant learning. It's not just about the individual's academic background, but what is the environment in which we're training them in that gives them the relevant information to be able to do the tasks they need to do when they need to do them. But we can't understate the challenge we have, and this is a little outside my lane, but of recruiting the talent we need as we're growing the force. And I think the recent, there's been changes to bonuses that have been helpful. I can't speak to the trends yet, but initially they look good. But it's also getting those talented sailors who maintain those aircraft, who work on those ships, is going to be a challenge, in my view.
I would wonder if perhaps in your thinking about this, it sounds like that you've given it some thought, whether there are ways that we could be organized differently to do that better and to make sure that as you suggest, the environment and the incentives could possibly be different.
So, ma'am, if I may respond to that, Secretary Wilson has recently nearly doubled our college intern program, which is bringing much more young talent to us. But she's also having us change the capacity of our recruiting squadrons, both in where they are at and where they go, to get to the talent that's available for us. And then finally, a lot of the people are getting experience. As we said, software is one of our growing concerns. Instead of bringing everybody in as a young airman or a young officer, it's hiring people to the right skill level that they're already at. And we're working with Congress to get that authority, and it's been very helpful.
Okay, we'll continue to work on that. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you, Mrs. Davis. If there are no other questions from the committee members, I want to thank our witnesses. Lieutenant General Harris, thank you. Lieutenant General Kirkland, thank you. Rear Admiral Khan, thank you. Thanks for your perspectives. As you pointed out, we have some challenges ahead, but we want to make sure that we are on track with the upgrades with existing aircraft and modernization with aircraft replacement and making sure that we stay on track. So we appreciate your efforts, and we look forward to continued progress in those realms. And if there's nothing else to come before the subcommittee, we stand adjourned.